Hello and welcome to Tracy Mommy Reads. I am back again with another video. Today, I'm going to be doing something a little different. I'm going to be running through the list of my favorite books by genre. One of my favorite words, right? So I don't know that I cover all the genres, but I feel like I got the vast majority of them, right? So I'm just going to go through and give a rundown of those books and, maybe a quick little thing. I'm going to try to be quick of like what the book is about for those of you who may be interested or learning why it's my favorite book. And I will tell you as I go through this list that I've read a lot of books in a lot of different genres. And there are those books that stick with you. And then there are books that you really enjoyed them when you were reading them, but they just didn't have as much of a lasting impression, right? And that, like with the first genre that I'm going to talk about, romance, that used to be my go-to genre, back in the day. I've read probably more romance books than any other books that, romance, contemporary fiction, probably neck and neck for the most books that I've ever read, in my life or whatever. But when we talk about books that make an impact, I mean, there were a lot of the Eric Jerome Dickey books back in the day, the Beverly Jenkins books. But the only book that I have read that has kind of eclipsed all of those books and has been with me, it just came out this year, but, I'm still finding, it hard to think of another book that I enjoyed as much in this genre. And that is A Love Song for Ricky Wilde by Tia Williams. It had the chemistry between the characters, just 5 out of 5. It had a bit of fantasy, and that's the thing that I've kind of been on lately with like time travel ish type things and immortality type stuff. Then it had the backdrop of Harlem, and she just writes her characters so beautifully in their chemistry, and her dialogue, the banter is just off the charts. I loved it. So currently, for my favorite book in the romance genre, it's going to be A Love Song for Ricky Wilde. In the mystery genre, I've read a lot of good books as of late, because like I said, it wasn't until I started the channel that I actually read my first mystery book. And so that the honor of being my favorite mystery book goes to the first book that I read in that genre, and that's The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. And it still remains my favorite simply because it was an incredibly slow burn. I will admit to that. But when that twist came, I just felt like it was done so cleverly, and because of that twist and because of the way that he did it, it has changed the way that I read mystery books. I'm always thinking everybody, even the most unlikely person, could be the culprit or the person who did it, because of the way that he crafted that story. It's an incredible story. Women's fiction. I have a tie here. And I don't know if so much, it seems like when it comes to stories written by Black authors, no matter what the story is about, it becomes a Black book or an African-American, book or whatever. And that's the genre that it ends up in. But I feel like Waiting to Exhale was definitely women's fiction. Definitely 1000% feel like that's women's fiction. And I did like a video where I paid homage to Terry McMillan, because I feel like that story became the blueprint for women friend type stories, with all the different personalities and, different things and how they were there for each other. It's still just, a top tier piece of work, so that's going to always be on my list. But tied with that in women's fiction, I was totally engrossed by When We Were Mermaids by Barbara O'Neill. That story is just phenomenal. It's a story of these two sisters who had something tragic happen to them, in their childhood, and they ended up going their separate ways. And it's a story about them reuniting, and, we get all this backstory about their lives before, and it's just so much imagery, and you know, the emotions are palpable, and you know how it ends. Everything is just really great about that book. I really love that. So the other book in the women's fiction would be When We Believed in Mermaids. As far as historical fiction, when people used to ask me like, oh, what is your favorite book, you know, as you can see, as I'm going through all these genres, sometimes it's hard to narrow it down to just one, because the books are so vastly different and you enjoy them for different reasons. But Wake of the Wind by J. California Cooper was one of the books I always told people was one of my favorite books. Well, I'm moving that into, it's my favorite historical fiction book. And if you've watched, you know, some of my older videos, I probably have talked ad nauseum about how that type of book I would have never in a million years read on my own. I was in a book club, and you know, I was like, why did they pick this book? And I just started flipping and fell in love with the story. And it is a book that takes place right as slavery is ending. So it follows these two individuals, Moore and Lifey. They were like basically forced to get married on this plantation, because, you know, I'm sure the guy's idea was that, oh, you know, Moore's this big strapping guy. He marries this woman and they have these kids. You know, that's going to be more big strapping, you know, people for us to enslave, right? But the slaves are freed, and Moore and Lifey, even though they didn't even know each other, they stayed married because he was a protector to her. And we follow their story as they do end up getting to know each other, and they do have kids, and they fall in love, and what their life looks like during Reconstruction, and how, given the worst possible start and situations, they're able to make a life for themselves. So it's a very richly layered story, not for the faint of heart. But, you know, very beautifully told story by J. California Cooper. So that's my favorite historical fiction. When you talk about literary, I mean, this book could probably fall under women's fiction. It could probably fall under historical fiction, literary fiction. But The Color Purple, that was one of the first books I read outside of like a kid's book or YA book. You know, because it came out like I think in 1983, and I think I read it right ahead of the movie coming out in 1984. So that's, you know, maybe I was too young to be reading it back then, but it was a book that kind of got me more interested in reading, because I'm like, this is what these books are about. This is what people are talking about in books. And I just fell in love, you know, obviously with Celie's story. And just the way it was written. And, you know, of course, back then it was a lot of scandalous stuff that she talked about. I mean, it was scandalous in that nobody had ever, like, really talked about that, right? About what was going on, and, you know, the incestuous things, and these young girls being given to these older men, you know, and all this type of stuff. So Alice Walker is, you know, one of the premier writers of all time. I would just say my generation, but of all time. So The Color Purple. Memoir in that genre. The autobiography of Malcolm X. To this day, you know, it's as told to Alex Haley. It's actually Malcolm's own words, and Alex was just able to transcribe and put it like in book form, right? And I'm telling you, the entire time I read that book, it was like I was reading a fictional novel. I was like, no way this actually happened to somebody. Somebody was living this life. It was just a very entertaining story. It gave you a lot of insight about Malcolm X. You know, it's just incredible, you know, the things that he was able to do. Essentially the short life that he lived. I mean, he was assassinated when he was like 38, 39 years old. But I really, really enjoyed his memoir. And I have a tie with that because Born a Crime, Trevor Noah's memoir. Oh, that was another one that you're like, is this real life? Did this stuff really happen? His was incredible in that not only like his story, you know, again, you know, the title alluding to the fact that it was illegal. His birth was illegal because his father was white and his mother was black, and that was illegal in South Africa in the 1980s, which is crazy, right? But also he gives us so much historical and political lessons throughout dispensing like his own story. He's giving you why this was happening and what was going on then in politics and, in Africa, and how it may be related to the U.S. and all that. So that was an incredible read as well. If you have not read Born a Crime, do it now. Self-help. In that genre, The Gifts of Imperfections by Brene Brown. The thing that I can remember about that book, there were just so many aha moments. And essentially, in a nutshell, what she's saying is that, so many of us strive for perfection. Like that's the goal. But we miss the gifts and the things and the lessons, and the wisdom that we gain by not being perfect. How to plan better, how to do better, how to be better only comes from falling down and having to get back up and try again. There was so many highlights that I did in that book. I may have to revisit that one and talk about it more on the channel, but that was a really good one. Most of Brene Brown's books are very good and very spot on, and she forces you to look at yourself and learn to love what you see. Okay. In the fantasy realm, I've read some more books like in this genre, but because I talk about it so much, I have to go ahead and give that title to the Twilight series. Like I said, when I maybe first ever mentioned that, someone that I worked with was telling me about it, and she thought, I think her daughter may have been reading it, and she didn't know if it was appropriate, so she started reading it to make sure, and then she was like telling me, because I like to read, and I was like, no, are those kids' books? What is that? And she was telling me it was like about a vampire, and I was like, okay, say less, because that I'm into it. I'm into the lore, right? And I was sucked into the whole vortex. And a lot of people, I feel like, especially now, it's like it's cringy to think or to say that you were into the Twilight books. But unlike what a lot of people say, because I think there was so much competition, or comparison rather, between Twilight and the Harry Potter books, and then the Hunger Games series, because they all were kind of like, out there around the same time and stuff, and that in comparison, Stephanie Meyer's books were not very well written, is what people say. I felt that they were well written enough. She got a book deal. I enjoyed the stories. I think the thing that I enjoyed the most about it was not even so much Bella and Edward stories. It was the world building that she did with the vampires and their different abilities or talents. Because I don't know, I think Anne Rice, she touched on that in her book. Obviously, she was the queen of that, and it pretty much was the one who amplified that genre. But I feel like it was almost like superpowers, like superheroes in a way. This person can do this and this person can do that. They can fly, they can laser people. And not only that, but tying it to their backgrounds before they became vampires. That's the thing that I really found, especially with the Cullens. All of them had such a different story, But I was there. I did it. I read all the books. I saw all the movies. I even got into the fan fiction for a minute. But hey, I have no regrets, and I don't feel guilty or ashamed about it. So there. Next, in sci-fi, and this my last video that I talked about when I compared the movie to TV, Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. It was just so incredibly done. The book, how it dealt with the idea of multiverses and traveling to different dimensions, and why people do that. And I think that is a common thread in most books that deal with time travel. People want to get a do-over. And then in the end, they realize what you got is what you were supposed to get, right? But yeah, I really, really enjoyed Dark Matter. I can't say enough how much I also love the TV series. So you should check that out if you're interested in something like that. Okay, short story. I have read a lot of short stories lately, and like I said, that has been my jam here lately, because especially if they're done well, you can read multiple short stories, or you get to, take a break from reading longer novels, but you also get a story that's satisfying, with a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? But outside of there was a book by Minka Kelly that I read. But most of the short stories, the thing about them, because they are so short, and if you move on to something else, they don't stay in my mind as much as the full-length novels, you know, because you have more time to build the characters, you have more time to allow the reader to get attached, you know, you have more time to build the storyline. But one short story that I have never forgotten, and I probably will never forget, and it is old as heck, but the impact. The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. My goodness. I mean, just think about, you know, you become a insect, you know, and like whether or not the people that you love, if they still would love you, and how would they look at you, and how would they care for you. And I also think that it's more of like, I don't know if it's metaphor or not, but when you think about unconditional love, right? And the idea of it is supposed to mean no matter what, I still love you. But even sometimes within families, romantic relationships, relationships between mothers and children, that's probably, I really feel like the relationship between mothers and children where you become the closest to that unconditional love, right? But most of the time there are expectations, you know, or things that people are looking at for you to have, you know, as a condition of their love. So, you know, just that whole story and how it unfolded and how he was able to have such a big impact, still all these decades later, people talking about that book, is just incredible. Okay, the last two. So, and YA, young adult, and I guess, you know, those Twilight books probably also fit the bill here, but I read a book by Rainbow Rowell called Eleanor and Park, like a while back. In the book, there, you know, these two teens, they're in high school, and like I said, they're misfits and like unpopular kids, a girl named Eleanor and a boy named Park. And they gravitate towards each other, and they, you know, become each other's friend, and, you know, they like each other. And it's just the way that she told the story about these two people, because a lot of times I know, especially like when you're that age, you're in high school or middle school or whatever, and you feel like nobody understands you or you're all alone. And then when you find this person that does, and it, you know, to help validate you and help build up your self-esteem, and you go through the paces with them, and the two of you, you know, learn more about yourself and the world around you, and you realize that you are worthy, and that while everybody may not understand you or get you or want you around, there's always someone that does. So you're never, you know, truly alone. So yeah, I really enjoyed that one. And so the last one is humor. There was a book that I read, and this was like when my kids were much younger, and when I read it, I mean, it was like she was, you know, had an insight to my life. You know, she was a suburban mom who had these two young kids, and it was the whole thing with the pickup lines and the stuff at the schools, and, you know, stuff at home, and just everything. It was just so relatable. But it was a book called People I Want to Punch in the Throat by Jen Mann. Oh my God, that, I mean, I when people say LOL or whatever, no, like I was reading that book, and there were times that I would just snort laugh. It was crazy. It was hysterical. Like her wit and her sarcasm, and the way that she would phrase things. And again, because it was so relatable, it was like, she seems like she's one of those people who says what everybody else is thinking, right? Out loud. Like, she says what everybody else is thinking out loud, and it's so startling and funny, but at the same time, you're like, yeah, I feel the same way. So that has remained one of the funniest books that I have read in that genre. So anyway, that is a quick rundown of, you know, the books that I really enjoyed in every genre. Let me know if I missed a genre. Let me know in the comments, and I will try to fill in the blanks for you on that particular genre if I missed it. And then also let me know a few of your favorite books from any of the genres that I mentioned. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure that you like this video and go ahead and turn on that post notification bell. Thanks so much for watching, guys. See you next time. Bye.